On behalf of the ADDitude team, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled 5 Life Skills Every ADHD Young Adult Needs to Cultivate. Leading today's presentation is Elaine Taylor-Klaus and Diane Dempster. Diane is a professional coach, speaker, author, and educator with 20 years of corporate leadership experience. Diane's the co-founder of ImpactParents.com, a global coaching and training organization to support parents and professionals of neurodiverse kids. The co-creator of Sanity School and the Sanity School certification program for professionals, she's an experienced leader, expert in change management, and all-around life Sherpa. She received a master's from the University of Michigan and coaching certification from the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching. Elaine is the mom of an ADHD plus family of 6, a master certified coach. She's also an international speaker, educator, and co-founder of Impact Parents. In addition to working privately with families and executives as a trusted advisor, she educates healthcare and education professionals in applying neurodiversity-informed coaching skills. Elaine's books include Parenting ADHD Now, Parenting with Impact, ADHD in Reality, and her personal favorite, The Essential Guide to Raising Complex Kids with ADHD, Anxiety, and More. In today's webinar, they will address the uncertainty that many parents feel as their teens with ADHD and executive function challenges look ahead to college or trade school or a first job. How do we know that they're finally ready to leave the nest? Today's coaching experts will share the 5 life skills that your teen or young adult needs to thrive. We'd like to begin today's webinar by asking 2 quick poll questions to our live audience. First, it will help us for today's presentation to know how old is the teen or young adult who you are here for today. And secondly, what one life skill would you add to your child's school curriculum if you could? What do you wish the schools were teaching?
Like that
you'll see the poll results when you submit your response. And live participants, please know you can submit questions anytime during the live event. To download the slides, click on the event resources section of your webinar screen. If you're interested in the certificate of attendance option, just look for instructions in an email you'll receive after we wrap up our live broadcast. And a transcript of today's event will also be made available. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, visit ADDitudemag.com and search podcast 450 to access the slides, the webinar replay, certificate of attendance, and transcript. If you support the work we're doing here at ADDitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit ADDitudemag.com/subscribe. Sign up now and you'll receive our upcoming summer issue with tips on graduation preparation, which is apropos, help for messy bedrooms, and a recommended list of audiobooks to engage even the most reluctant readers with their summer reading list. Finally, the sponsor of today's webinar is Play Attention, NASA-inspired technology that improves executive function and self-regulation. For more than 25 years, Play Attention has been helping children and adults thrive and succeed. Tufts University School of Medicine found Play Attention significantly improved attention, executive function, academic performance, and behavioral control of students with ADHD. Your program will include a lifetime membership and a personal executive function coach to customize your plan along the way. Home and professional programs are available. Call 828-676-2240 or click the link on your screen to schedule your free one-on-one consultation. Visit www.playattention.com to learn more. ADDitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. The sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without any further ado, thank you so much, Elaine and Diane, for being here today and for leading us in this really timely and helpful discussion.
Thank you, Annie. That was awesome. And appreciate the surveys in particular. Diane, I don't know if you had a chance to check them out, but I'm looking, it's like how many people we've got with kids here between, 11 and 22. It's huge. Yeah. And then, what do they want is to be able to apply for a job and get out of the door in the morning is such a high priority. How to pay your bills. So it's great intel for us as we move into this conversation. Thank you. So welcome everybody. We are on a tight time frame to get a lot of stuff in a short time frame. So we're going to keep moving, and we just want to kind of say if there's anything that you want to know more about, we're available. We're happy to follow up, and everything we're going to talk about today is available in other places. We're going to talk about 5 life skills every day ADHD young adults need to cultivate. And all of the material we're talking about today comes from either the Essential Guide to Raising Complex Kids, Sanity School, which is our behavior training program for parents, or a combination of the two. And so all of this research, there's a lot more underneath the surface of what we're going to talk about today. It's available if you'd like more.
We're going to start with a few things that you may have heard somewhere, somehow in your house. Stop being so hard on her. She's trying.
Can't you see she's doing her best? Stop babying him. He needs to learn to do things for himself.
Or maybe you hear from your kids, I've got this, Mom. Stop worrying.
Or maybe back off, right? Yikes. A lot of us feel like I'm just helping my kids more than I want to be. And what if they aren't able to do it for themselves?
And how are they ever going to make it on their own? There's that fear and worry that we have. We call it catastrophizing that happens.
So as parents, what we want most for our kids is to guide them to what we hope will be a happy and successful and independent life, right? That's the goal.
But what we really want secretly, privately in our own head is something other than this, right? We don't want them to be in our basement when they're 30 playing video games 24 hours a day, right?
Right. We want them to be able to get out into their world and live a full life.
And we're talking about kids with ADHD. So we know that typically kids with ADHD are as much as 30%, that maybe 3 to 5 years behind their peers in terms of some aspects of their development, particularly their executive function development. And I think a lot of you know that term, executive function. We're not going to teach you what executive function is, but executive function is the part of our brain that tells us what to do and what not to do and helps us to organize and plan and self-manage and all those life skill things that we need to be able to do.
Well, and when our kids have a 30% delay, when they're younger, we see this 3 to 5 years, but as they get older, when a kid is 20 years old, 30% is a significant percentage of their life. That's more than 6 or 7 years. So we really want to understand that our kids are developmentally delayed in some aspects of their development, but not all. And that's the key, right? They are, in some ways, they may be sophisticated in conversation or have a really strong interest or skill. So there's some ways that in which they're well developed. And then we find ourselves wondering, why can't they just in these other areas? And that's that disconnect that can make life really frustrating and aggravating for us as parents.
Well, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, but a lot of these kids are twice exceptional. And so they may be smarter than, their age traditionally. But when we're talking about executive function delays, those are things that require scaffolding, or they require skill building, or they require accommodation, or sometimes it's just a matter of waiting till our kid gets old enough and that they mature and those skills get developed naturally. But what it leads to is teens who are college age, but may not be quite college ready.
And this is, and if we're honest, most kids who are college age are not quite college ready.
No,
I mean, even neurotypical kids aren't really ready most of the time.
Well, somebody said to me that until they're halfway through the first semester of college, they're still in their head high school seniors, right? It's
Well, that came from an expert when my kid was going off, and at Emory University, a leading psychologist who said they go off to college as high school seniors. They go back after Thanksgiving break as college freshmen, right? Yeah. So they're not ready at the beginning, and that's okay.
And what we're really trying to do is foster ownership, develop independent kids. And it's an incremental process. A lot of times as parents, we think, okay, yay, they're here, they're independent. And it's like a field goal. But the reality is that, they were independent at tying their shoes when they were, elementary age. And, they're going to be independent. There may be other things that they're not independent at until they're much, much older. But there's this process that we go through of fostering ownership and developing independence rather than just waiting for the day when they're magically independent.
So the message we want to really hit home here is that this is an incremental process. That's not a destination. It's about being in the process with them and teaching them the process of problem solving again and again and again. Because our job as parents is basically, at the end of the day, it's twofold. It's to guide kids to independence and to stay connected to them in the process, so that when they do need help or guidance or support, they trust us enough to come to us for that. And so that we're in relationship with them.
Right.
That part's fun too.
Right. We want to be in relationship with them, and our ability to guide and to help and support them is completely matched with how connected we are able to be. And so much of the situations end up in contention with the parent and child dynamic where, there's door slamming and leave me alone and that sort of stuff. And so that commitment to finding ways to reconnect and stay connected is an important piece.
So we've got independence and we've got connection. And then we've got what we have come to call the independence paradox. And this is the notion that our kids are likely, and when I say kids, just want to say I'm very clearly talking about teens and young adults here. I'm not talking about little ones. Kids of all ages, because the older we get, the older kids become, right? Our kids will seek and accept help less often than they actually need, because they've got lagging skills, but they really don't want to have the lagging skills. And so they're likely to ask for and accept help. And we'll talk about that more later, less often than they actually need.
Well, and as adults,
right?
As adults, we expect our kids to be able to do more than they can, right? It's just sort of, we find ourselves asking, why can't they just? We don't want to help our kids as much as they need to. So there's this paradox of they're not asking for help, but they need it. But I don't want to have to give it to them, but they need it.
Because I want them to not need it.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's this gap here between what help is needed and what help is desired on both sides. And the tool to really address this disconnect is twofold. One is about clarifying the roles. Your role, their role,
and our roles in particular, but all of our roles, right?
And then to focus on the life skills, and that's what our advertisement for today is to really identify some of those key life skills. And the other piece of it is to really get clear on what is our role in supporting the development of those life skills.
And so, before we get into the life skills, because that's what we promised, I promise we're going to give that. We feel like we would do you a disservice if we didn't look at where their life skill development comes in relationship to our roles with them. So we want to look first at what's underneath the surface about the parent's role, and then we will move into the student's role, right?
So we were talking about the independence paradox and the tension that sometimes gets created because of that paradox. And the reality is that our response as the adults, the parents, the grandparents, the educators, whoever you are in relationship to these emerging young adults, our response really has the ability to influence the outcome, whether it's in a favorable way or an unfavorable way. So a key part of this is self-management, is self-awareness. It's this sort of, how am I showing up? How am I being as I'm partnering with this kiddo and helping them to become independent, and paying attention to that more explicitly?
Well, and one of the things I heard you say, we did another presentation earlier today, and you were making that distinction between who we're being as a parent as well as what we're doing as a parent. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important, because when we get really stuck on the doing, that's when we tend to be more reactive. When we can focus on how we want to be as a parent, we're more likely to be calm and conscious and more engaged and attentive.
Well, and
Right.
not only that, but the reality is when we are overwhelmed and frustrated and all those emotional sorts of stuff, we're naturally going to focus on the doing
The
more, because
problems.
that's the way
Yeah.
it's like, I got to fix this. I'm like urgent and scared and anxious and all those other sorts of things. So we got to go back and go, whew, how am I showing up? There
Okay.
are 4 roles that we teach that we focus on in terms of the parents' role and phases that we go through as parents: director, collaborator, supporter, and champion. And we're not going to go into a lot of detail on this. We have programs that we teach that explicitly cover all of this. But I think all of you probably resonate with that word director and know that particularly when our kids are young, we tend to set the pace and set the rewards, and we're going to do homework, and then we're going to do this. And, it's like we're set, we're in the lead. We're making it happen.
Well, and sometimes we get in the lead and then we get stuck there.
Yeah.
Right. Because as our kids, their executive function may be delayed and they're not picking up as quickly as we would expect, then we start kind of justifying, I'm going to stay in director mode because they need me to. But by getting stuck there, and this is very normal and very typical, so no beating yourself up for it, right? It makes it harder for us to move into collaboration. But collaboration is where we begin to share an agenda with our kid, and they start to take a little bit of ownership, and they start to become more autonomous. And we don't give them the space. I often say it's about like transferring the reins when you're teaching someone to ride a horse. If we don't give them the reins to start playing with, they're not going to learn to ride it themselves, to direct it themselves. So director and collaborator, we want to start shifting into collaboration as soon as possible. We often do that when they're toddlers, and then we fall out of it when they get into elementary age. And then a lot of parenting we discover happens in this space between collaborating and support when you're parenting teens and young adults. This dance between collaborating them and then moving into support role when they take ownership, and moving back into collaborate and then moving back into support. It's a constant process. It's not a linear kind of thing.
Well, and one of the side effects of the independence paradox we talked about earlier is that because we're staying in director mode probably a little bit longer than our kids, absolutely longer than our kids would prefer, but maybe even longer than they need to, and is that our kids don't want to suddenly out. They don't want to collaborate. They want independence. I want to be able to do it myself. Mom, get out. I've got it. I'm fine. Dad, I've, slamming the door and I've got it. I can't tell you how many times I heard that phrase, Mom, I got it. Don't worry about me. And so they want us to move maybe even beyond champion mode to completely out of it. And so sometimes we have to back into collaboration and support from a place of, oh, wow, giving them space to notice, not necessarily to fail, because these are kids with executive function challenges and they don't traditionally learn from failure the same way as neurotraditional kids do, but to give them an experience of trying to own it and scaffolding to say, okay, so you're owning it. You got it. Great. I'm here for you. Let's check in. Let's figure it out. And then you can move back into more of a collaborative, supportive role.
So I know we need to move on. And here's what I want to say. And I'm seeing some of the questions in the chat about, grandparents, and it's hard. And what if I wasn't successful in phase 1? There's a lot of stuff. And again, we're trying to give you this framework because it's going to lead into the bulk of what we want to talk about today. And what I want to say, we do have a lot of grandparents in our programs, and a lot of the work we do is helping parents learn how to step out of director mode and into collaboration mode. Because very often, if we're not feeling successful in director mode, it may be because our kids are wanting and needing collaboration, and they need us to step in differently with them. So there's a lot of skills around this that we can offer beyond that. But for today's purposes, we really want you to understand that this is not a static process. We're constantly moving between the phases of how we parent, and the same is true for our kids. And we're going to get into that in a minute. What do you want to add, Di?
No, I was just going to say, and part of it is getting your kids to a place where they're open and available for moving into those other, letting you move into those other roles.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to shift our focus to our kids. What life skills do they need to start with on the surface? And we use an iceberg here because there are a million gazillion life skills you want your kids to have. And we all know they don't need to have them all before they turn 18 or before they leave the house, although we wish they did. And so we're going to just hit some surface level skills and understand that there's a lot more that's beneath it, and it goes in layers.
Well, and you said that, I want to reiterate, Elaine, this is not, they have to have this mastered before they can leave the house. This is just set up to kind of have you focus on a few things that they're going to be developing over time, maybe give you a little bit of a prioritization, because there's probably 7,000 things you want them to be able to do eventually. But we want to help you prioritize and really focus in on a few key areas. And so at the top here, we're talking about our phases as parents: director, collaborator, supporter, and champion. And for our kids, where they're moving to is self-direction, collaboration, seeking support, and what we're calling celebrating. And the third component of this is this reminder, because we talked about this earlier, these are kids with executive function challenges. These are kids who are struggling with life, with learning, with behavior. And so understanding what's really going on underneath their brain is a key concept that we need to keep into mind underneath this.
So everything starts with the brains. And we have this tendency to do a really good job of doing our own research and understanding our kids' diagnosis and understanding what needs to happen. And then we the way we present it to our kids, very often they get defensive or resistance, or, oh, she's talking about ADD again, or I don't really want to hear it, because it makes them feel broken. It makes them feel like we're trying to fix them. And so what we want to introduce here is that one of the key things to help young people be successful as they leave the house is to understand what's going on in their brains from a place of non-judgment, without shame, without embarrassment, just like, here's how I function. Here's what works for me. Here's what didn't. More from that place of learning style than it is of something that feels broken. And so helping our kids grow to get curious about their brain and to understand it from a place of not feeling broken can be a really powerful stepping stone or starting point for everything that's to come.
Well, and it's about normalization, right? It's this sort of, we all have strengths, we all have challenges. And our brains are no different. My kids used to tease me because I have a poor working memory that, oh, Mom, you're so ADD. And I'm like, well, technically I'm not, but I appreciate the fact that working memory is not always my strength, particularly when I'm stressed out. But it's that normalization of everybody's brains has things that they're really great at and things that are harder for them. And so, move on to the next slide, Elaine. What we want to remind our kids of, and of ourselves as well, is that we're not just talking about our kid's brain, right? We're talking about components. I mean, the brain has really three key components. There's cognitive, intellectual capacity, which is our smarts. I'm going to shortcut it and say that. There's executive function, which is what we were talking about earlier. It's the self-management, it's the organizing, the planning, those sorts of things. And then the third thing is limbic system management, which is, how am I managing my emotions? How am I avoiding getting hijacked or flooded or triggered or overwhelmed or stressed or whatever it is? And how am I handling it when I am? And this is true for our kids, and it's true for us as well, because the reality is that if we're overwhelmed or stressed out or anxious or afraid, we're not available in our full capacity.
Right. We're not available to problem solve. Mm-hmm. And it's the interplay between these three things that sets our kids up. And honestly, we humans, it sets us all up for success, right? Success relies on the interplay of all of them. And so we want to make sure we're not only focusing on the cognitive or the test or the planner, and we're really looking at the whole person, because they have to be able to manage the anxiety or the fear or the trust in order to be available for the rest. So it all starts in the brain, right?
And so that's the first life skill, is really setting your kiddo up to understand what's going on in my brain and what are my strengths and what are my challenges. The second piece is self-direction. These kids have to figure out how to do the things. They've got to be able to figure out how to get as much sleep as they can. It may not be enough sleep in our mind, but they've got to figure out, how do I put myself to bed? How do I make sure that I have food in my body? How do I make sure that if I'm in college, I'm working on my assignments? If I'm going to work, how do I get to my job and do my work at work? So there's this I've got to own this. This is my job and I've got to do it.
Yeah. One of the things, so we've got these 5 components that we're sharing with you today, but I want to step back and say, we did some research. This is not just the world according to Elaine and Diane. We went to our young adult kids who've been successful through college. We went to our amazing bench of coaches, and we have student coaches and adult and parent coaches, and said, okay, what do these people need to hear? And then what we discovered as we collected all of this stuff from them is that it fit really nicely into that framework. I want to go back here for a second of, there's 4 phases for parents, but there's also kind of 4 key phases for kids in terms of self-direction, collaboration, support, and celebration. So right now we're talking about the first one, self-direction. But what we heard from our kids was that being able to put yourself to bed, being able to plan to make sure I can get breakfast before I make it to my 9 a.m. class, those are big. That's really key. And so that self-direction of I want to figure out how do I get myself to do what I want to do, which is one of the number one indicators of ADHD, right? Is a really key skill. And what we can't tell you here is the 20 million things you can do to help them with that. But if you can understand that self-direction is hard for them and acknowledge that for them, you can begin to enroll them in learning how to do them little steps at a time.
Well, and the thing I would add to what you're saying, Elaine, is that this is not about giving them strategies. I was talking to a parent this morning, and so often it's like, this is what you do to make sure that you get up in the morning. Well, you have to go to bed earlier, or you have to have a little chart on your desk that tells you what to, it's like this sort of, we have the strategies, but we don't want to focus just on the strategies. We want to focus on the skills, right? So it's this sort of, what do you want, how do you want to try to get yourself up in the morning? What are you working on right now in terms of your own self-management, and really kind of getting them in a place where they're thinking about what they want to do and what they need to do, rather than just trying to get them to do it in a certain way.
Yeah. We have a gift for you all that we'll tell you about later that you can download, which is a guide to whether kids are ready to be coached or not. In addition to that, there's another article that we have about a letter to your teen, that, the things your teen needs to be able to learn to do for themselves before they leave. And so we'll make that available for you as well, so that you can have kind of a checklist to go over with them slowly, little bits at a time.
Just remember, it's not before they leave, it's eventually.
Right. But a framework to begin to have these conversations with them about what is it that you've been doing for them that you want to begin to invite them to want to do for themselves. And you hear that language I'm using, invite them to want to. It's not what they have to do. It's about enrolling them in taking ownership of it.
Yeah.
So self-direction is a big one. I'm having a hard time moving the slide. There we go.
The second one is about collaborating. And this is managing social relationships, whether it's in college and being able to navigate the party scene, or a roommate agreement, or if you're in a job situation, managing a boss that may not be very nice, or a coworker who's late all the time. I mean, there's all these different kind of social situations that our kids need to begin to navigate in a very different way. And we can be there to help them through this, but understanding that this is part of what they're trying to do on top of going to school. Oh my gosh, they got to figure out all this other stuff on top of it.
Right. They've got to be able to learn to say no. They've got to be able to say no to another drink, to, maybe a substance someone is introducing. They've got to be able to say no to going out late at night when everybody else is leaving at midnight and they know they've got a test in the morning. Those are really complicated life skills. And so teaching them some negotiation skills, that they start with us. And if we negotiate with our teenagers, especially before they leave home, they're going to learn some skill dynamic there. If we wait and feel like, well, they should just do everything we say and never negotiate with them, well, they're going to learn those skills from their peers, not from us. And so we really want to be in negotiation with them. That's where collaboration comes in, so that they can also be in negotiation with their peers.
Well, and part of this is about figuring out what they want, right? It's sort of, they may want to go to the party. And so figuring out how to go to the party and go to the class may be the skill that they need to be able to navigate. It's like, how do I have fun with my roommates and go out to lunch and make sure that I'm not spending all my money the first week that I'm away from home?
Of the term. Yeah. Yeah. We used to have something in our house called rock and roll lifestyle, which was this whole thing about you can stay up late and do this tonight, and you still got to get up tomorrow morning and get on the road, like the performers do. And so there are ways that we can begin to give them the skills to navigate these kinds of juicy yeses and juicy nos for themselves.
Well, I'm paying attention to our time, Elaine.
Yeah. I'm having a hard time. There we go. Okay. Next one is support. And this is the third area. So we've talked about the brain. We've talked about self-direction. We've talked about collaboration. This is a biggie, asking for help, right? Finding support, leaning into support. I have a client of mine who was a college professor, is still a college professor. And she said when we moved to COVID, what she noticed was that students were asking her questions that they used to ask upperclassmen, but they didn't have access to them at that time. And so helping our kids learn to ask questions and ask for help and to advocate for themselves is a really powerful life skill. And we want to be careful to do it, again, as Diane said, from a place of what's important to them, how does it serve them and support them, instead of from a place of expecting it from them, right? It's about helping them learn to ask for help because it helps them, and there's a value to that.
Well, and one of the things that I heard a parent say is that, asking for help is a huge life skill, and it's part of what adulting is all about, right? It's a sort of, you were joking earlier about the fact that you don't do your taxes. I happen to do my taxes, but I don't fix my car. I don't do all these sorts of things. But I think that our kids don't see us asking for help very often. And a lot of times we get really busy and we're in director mode and we're just doing the things. And so we don't ask for help. So our kids don't realize that it's part of what we all need to learn how to do is, what am I good at? Where do I need help?
So Diane, let's skip ahead and to this, and then we'll go back. Okay.
Yeah, because I think that everybody's going to ask this question, right? So it's just sort of why don't my kids ask for help? Why do they resist it?
And we've been asking this question for a long time, and, letting audiences step in and answer, why do you think they don't ask for help? Why do you think? And what we realized is this isn't about them. This is about all of us.
Everybody.
Right? Why does anyone resist asking for or accepting help? Because we are all guilty of this, right? And we've kind of come up with some key reasons.
Yeah. So the first one might be that we're afraid and we're not ready to do the thing that's being asked for us, right? It's just sort of, there's some tenuousness about even doing it in the first place.
Can we just stay there for a second? Okay. Because with young adults, you alluded to this earlier, a lot of 18-year-old kids think that so we see this with high school kids. They get stuck in the college prep process. And when you get down to it, it's because they feel like they're supposed to know everything they need to know to be able to leave for college. And so they're afraid, as Diane says, they're not going to be able to do their taxes or manage their bank account or whatever it is. And they don't yet understand that they don't have to know it all before they leave, that they're going to learn it. So if they're afraid they're not going to be ready, a lot of our kids, particularly complex kids, are afraid of not being mature enough to go to college. Then they may actually create an impediment to themselves and sabotage themselves along the way. Okay, go ahead.
The second piece is about feeling stressed and triggered. And we alluded to the fact that when we are overwhelmed or stressed or triggered or flooded or whatever language you want to use, we don't have access to the problem-solving part of our brain. And the problem-solving part of our brain is the part that says, oh, wait, I'm having a hard time. I need some help. Yeah. And so if there's a lot of stress and overwhelm going on for our kids, I mean, these are kids who have probably most of their life not really quite understood why the thing that shouldn't be hard for them is hard for them. It's going to create some stress and some overwhelm.
The next one is, if we're asking why don't kids ask for help or accept help, oftentimes it's because it's our agenda, not theirs. We're trying to get them to do something. We've gotten them a tutor. We've gotten them a coach. We've given them the solution. Why aren't they using it? And very often when that's the case, it's because it's actually not their agenda, it's ours. And getting really clear on what's important about it to them becomes an important shift in that dynamic.
The next one is about feeling safe or trusting, right? It's this sort of, if we're not in an environment where we trust either the adults in our life, or we trust ourselves to kind of go out there on a limb and ask for help, we're going to be more likely to kind of stay reserved and not go out on a limb and say, hey, I need some help here.
Yeah. Similarly, the kids don't want to feel judged, and we don't want to feel judged. And somehow we equate that in our world, that somehow if I have to ask for help, something's wrong with me. And I don't want someone to think that I can't. Well, and that's similar to, we feel like we shouldn't need it. We don't want to need it. And those things really make it very difficult to advocate for ourselves and to get the help we need.
Well, and the thing I want to take us back to is, we started with, why don't our kids ask for help? Right. And if we go, my kid won't ask for help, and then we go and say, well, which one of these things or several of these things might be going on for my kid? Oh, wow, my kid's stressed out. Well, that's what's really going on here. So I'm not focused on getting them to ask for help. I'm working on figuring out how to create a trusting environment, or I'm working on how to help them to feel less stressed and overwhelmed, or manage their stress and overwhelm, or I'm creating an environment where they might feel less judged. I mean, it's a sort of, these feel more actionable and things that we can partner with them on, rather than just getting them to ask for help.
Yeah, and I will tell you, I have 3 young adults now who have all were teenagers all the way along the way, and acknowledging their experience, acknowledging how it is for them, that it is hard for them, is probably one of the most powerful tools we have at our disposal as parents. Instead of saying, why can't you just? It shouldn't be that hard. If we just shift that to, I can see this is really hard for you. It builds trust, and it gives them a different access point to accept the kind of support that we're offering. So I'm going to go back, because we've been talking about support and asking for help.
The fourth one is about celebrating and about knowing. I think we always talk about strengths-based support, and our kids, the more our kids focus on what is working, the more inspired they're going to be. But we need to teach our kids to celebrate. We need to teach our kids not just to focus on what's not working, but to really go, wait, I did a great job with this. This was awesome. I can do this. We want them to self-inspire and to get to that place where they're doing that. What would you add, Elaine?
So, this notion, the solutions are in the successes. We have this tendency to look, and we're really good at seeing what's wrong or what's not good enough. We teach a tool called the Magic 3 Questions, which is to start with what is working before we look at what didn't work or how we want to do something different. And if we set the expectation at looking at what is working first, it sets a tone to believe that I can build on that. And success breeds success. So teaching our kids to pay attention to what works is really important, because I had a student I worked with long ago when I was still coaching students before I started coaching exclusively adults. She was 14 and she was really struggling to get her homework done, but she planned an entire spend the night party for all her friends and arranged for carpools and everything. And when we were able to look at the successes in that and what she had done, she was then able to map it over to figure out how to get her homework done. So celebrating the successes can be super, super powerful.
So again, we've got parallel processes. We've got the process for us continuously moving more out of director mode, more into collaboration, more into support, more into champion, managing that back and forth. And at the same time, helping them develop the skills of self-direction, collaboration, seeking support, and celebration. And as a fifth one, just always remembering what's going on in the brain.
Yeah. So we have very limited time today to cover a lot of material. So what I want to leave us with is this pyramid that Diane and I have been cultivating and developing for the last several years, actually, and we keep tweaking it. And what we've begun to see in the work that we do, and we work with thousands of parents all over the world, is that for our kids to get to independent action, it relies on a lot of pieces. On the one side, it relies on our self-management and their self-management. On another side, as we talked a lot about today, understanding our roles are really important. And then the key is to see the ownership and buy-in and problem solving, all that stuff that we want them to achieve. It starts way earlier down at the bottom in relationship and trust and communication. And that leads into the collaboration we've been talking about. So again, there's a lot more that we can say about this, but I want you to see the framework that there is really a lot of layers going on, and nothing is as simple as the one thing we see on the surface. Whenever we're frustrated, we invite you to get curious and start looking at what's happening underneath.
Well, and I want to inspire you, because I think a lot of times we get to a teenage or college age kids, and that trust and relationship and communication is broken down. And there's lots of reasons, and I don't want to make anybody feel bad or guilty for it. And it's so important to go back to that. And so if you're finding that your relationship with your kiddo is strained, your communication patterns are strained, go back to that and figure out, how do I reconnect with my kids so that I can move into collaboration and problem solving with them and support them in a very different way.
Yeah. I just I'm trying to figure out where to land here. People are asking for more resources in the questions. Again, everything we've shared with you today is in the Essential Guide, or most of it is, or Sanity School. We have a gift for you at impactparents.com/college. And what I'll commit to you is, if you go there and download that, we will also send you the article I mentioned about the letter to your teens before they leave home, as well as a podcast episode about the 4 phases for parents that we were talking about. So hopefully that will give you some of the resources that you have. And Annie, I think we almost hit your time frame, and we want to make sure there's plenty of time for questions for everybody. So I want to acknowledge you all. I guess there's one more thing I want to say really quick, which is thank you all for being here, for doing what you're doing, for your attention and your engagement. Your being here is a sign that it makes a huge difference, and it's how you know that you're engaged and you want to be in this kind of relationship with your kids. And you'll be amazed at how quickly you can begin to shift that relationship when you begin to pay attention to some of these dynamics and take a more coach-like approach. Okay.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Diane and Elaine. Before we start our Q&A, I will just quickly thank Play Attention once more for sponsoring today's webinar. And you will remember the survey you took at the beginning. Quite interesting that the ages really do span all the way from 11 to kind of early adulthood, 26 and beyond. And quite a few parents asking here today, is it ever too late to begin this process, this journey of encouraging self-direction and collaboration and self-advocacy? Maybe, is there an ideal time at which this process would begin? And, is there hope for those parents of young adults?
I'm going to let you answer. The ideal time is starting right now. Right. But Diane, how do you want to respond?
No, I was just going to say the ideal time is now, and give yourself permission to have experienced whatever you have up until now, and know that I don't personally believe that it's ever too late. Your approach might be a little bit different with a 22 or a 24-year-old than it might be with a 14 or a 10-year-old. And those of you who do have younger kids, beginning to foster and cultivate those collaborative, supportive roles, and giving them more ownership where they can take it, and giving them support where they need it is key. And if your kids are older, getting to a place where they're, where you're helping them accomplish what they want to accomplish. It's like trying to get them to do, you were talking about agenda earlier, Elaine. And it's like, if you start with, I want my kid to do this thing and it's so important to me, versus if you start with, I see my kid really struggling with this and griping to me about X, Y, and Z, and say, I have some ideas. Do you want some help with that? It's that sort of entering into things from things that they're interested in, even more than things that we're interested in. Where would you go?
Well, so, we showed you that pyramid, right? And this is the key, is that it all starts with relationship and building trust. And that allows us to improve communication and leads into collaboration. And, Diane and I have gone back and forth again and again about, which of these things should go in what order, but we don't question whether relationship is at the foundation of it all.
Yeah.
And it's never too late, because I promise you, your kid wants to be in relationship with you more than anything. They may
Even
not
if they say it.
know how, they may not trust it, they may be afraid of it, but they want to be in relationship with you more than anything. And so if you can let go of the attachment we have to the doing and really pay attention to being in relationship with your kids, all kinds of other things will start coming from there. I assure you, and we see it happening with the coaches in our group coaching, with the clients in our group coaching programs and in Sanity School all the time. The shift can happen really fast when you stop focusing on what you expect from them and you start wanting for them. It's a huge shift.
Okay, excellent. And on that note of the relationship building, we have a question here from a parent who said, my relationship with my son is pretty strong. We really trust each other. He's in 11th grade, but he has failed 2 classes this year. So his confidence is really, she said, in the basement, because those classes were presented as sort of college level type classes. How can I help him cultivate his confidence again? She asks.
The phrase that pops in, Elaine, this kid needs a win, right? It's just sort of talking about that idea of celebrating, creating an environment where you're talking not just about all the problems, but you're celebrating the things that are working, helping this kid to begin to see his strengths. And, you know, there are things, even in a class that he's not doing well in, there are probably aspects to that are easier for him, and being able to look at, you know, what are all the things it takes to be successful in school? What are the things that are easy for me? Awesome. Let's celebrate that. What are the things that are harder for me? Okay. So that is harder. Is there something we can do to support and address that? You know, and so kind of going from that more holistic approach rather than just the focusing on what's wrong and trying to shore it up is what's coming up for me. What about you, Elaine?
So here's what's coming up for me is that our kid, as said, you know, our kids want us to be in relationship with them, and they want us to believe in them. And all the research on resilience is absolutely clear. Resilience is the #1 indicator of lifelong success above intelligence. And all kids need is one person in their corner who believes in them. The key is, and if you've ever read the book by Jerry Schultz, Nowhere to Hide, he taught me once. I used to say the 10 most important words you can say to your kid are, I believe in you, I know you can do it. And what he taught me is that when a kid starts to challenge their own confidence, you don't want to be setting them up to feel like now that's one more way in which they're disappointing me. And so I shifted that to, I believe in you, I know you can do it. And I know you may be having a hard time believing that for yourself right now, but I know that about you, and I'm going to hold it for you until you're ready to hold it again, because I know you have the capacity for this and you're going to get there. And sometimes it takes a little while to get there. I used to say to my kids all the time, you're going to be an amazing adult. We just got to get you there. And it's not a straight line. You know, there are going to be ups and downs and ins and outs. So when you've got a kid who's struggling to believe in themselves, believe in them and let them know that it's okay that they may be doubting themselves, that that's normal at their age. And that doesn't mean it's true. That just means that's their self-doubt creeping in. And that's a place to do some work and to challenge some gremlins and to learn to navigate, because that's real and that's life.
Well, and I think that's the other place I was going to go, Elaine, is that so many times as parents, when our kids throw in self-doubt or self-judgment or I hate myself, or our kids say stuff that's pretty horrible and uncomfortable to be around. And we immediately go to reverse it. Oh no, that's not true. You're wonderful. You're amazing. You have, it's like this sort of, and when we do that, we discount their experience. And so there's a tool we teach. It's called ACE, and it's about acknowledging and validating. It's like, I see that this is really hard for you, and it makes sense that you'd be beating yourself up about it. And as you said, and give them the space and permission to feel what they're feeling before you go into, okay, so how do we fix it?
Right. We tend to jump to problem solving. Yeah. And sometimes they need us to just be with them and validate it for a minute. One of my kids said to me once, I'm sure I was trying to fix some problem or whatever. And they looked at me and they said, Mom, I just need a poor baby. What? Oh, okay. I'm sorry, poor honey. Baby. I'm sorry you're dealing with this poor baby. So now in my family, my kids they'll ask for each other. I just need a poor baby. Because sometimes people just want to be acknowledged. They don't want you to fix it for them. They just want you to acknowledge this is hard.
Yeah.
And it is.
It is. And I think as the parent of 2 teenagers, I can say this is a particularly hard time to be a teenager.
Oh my gosh. Yes,
absolutely.
So,
unprecedented.
The mental health challenges are real. And we've seen that in these comments today. So many parents whose their focus is sort of rightfully on social emotional health.
As well it should be. Annie, I was speaking to a school district in New Jersey, I don't know, sometime in the last couple of weeks. And what I realized before I went was that we're living in a really strange time where what used to be existential fears have become real fears.
Yeah.
And we can't dismiss that. We can't deny the fact that teachers and parents and kids are all afraid for their kids to walk into a school.
It's almost like Maslow's hierarchy. We're back down at the bottom on safety. Yeah. Whether it's our health safety or our physical safety. And it's hard to do all this stuff that's above it
when we're not feeling safe.
We're not feeling safe.
And there are times where our kids, for a lot of reasons, and I'm not just talking about safety, physical safety in school, there's just a lot of layers of it that's happening right now. And what we learned in COVID was that we are resourceful and we can learn to navigate uncertainty. And navigating uncertainty can bring up a lot of fear for kids. And we need to acknowledge that. As you say, Annie, these are really, the Essential Guide was written for complex kids, parenting complex kids, and it has turned out to be really applicable to parenting any kid in complex times.
These are definitely
complex
times,
right?
Complex times. And yeah, I think it can't be said enough that, if our kids are struggling, they are not alone. And
it's real.
It's real.
Yeah.
It's real. One common theme that we saw in the comments here was, one parent wrote in, I find giving my son the opportunity to be self-directed difficult because he would fail. He would fail his classes if we didn't intervene. And she thinks that she says, we haven't found anything to motivate him. Without a sense of motivation, it feels impossible. Can you talk a little bit about this inherent motivation and the challenges maybe inherent in ADHD and how parents could look at that?
You want to start?
I mean, there's so many things in that. Is, number one is the idea of motivation, right? And motivation is key and important. And a lot of times what looks like not motivated is actually, I don't have the executive function to do the thing that I even want to do. And so I kind of give up, or I avoid or distract, or I go into, or I'm overwhelmed and I don't know how to get past the overwhelm and the stress. And so I go into an avoidance mode. And so a lot of the behaviors we see, the distractibility, going into gaming or computer use or whatever it is because it's not because our kids are not motivated. It's because there's this level of overwhelm that it's hard to get past to even acknowledge, wow, do I have the skills to do this? Or is this really about being motivated?
So here's what I add. Yes to everything Diane said. And it's not that they're not motivated. It's what they're motivated to do. And they're often motivated. They're always motivated. Always. It's just they're motivated. They may be motivated to avoid or motivated to find stimulation someplace else, or like there is a motivation there. It's just not motivated towards what you may want, which leads me to the other response, which is if I don't do it, it doesn't get done, is the message underlying that question, right? And if you go back to the 4 phases we talked about, when you teach someone to ride a horse, first you walk around and you hold the reins, and then you hand them the reins. But when you hand them the reins, you have to be willing to let them practice and get it wrong a little bit before they get it right. And you have to be willing to let them say, okay, I really want to ride this. And if we're holding the reins too tight, and we parents often hold the reins too tight, no judgment here. It's just, we do. Until we learn how to transfer the ownership, we're afraid they're not going to get it right. And so we don't give them enough lead to even learn to do it in the first place. So oftentimes when parents say, I've got to do it because they're not going to do it, usually what's happening is the kids finally figured out, doesn't matter if they try or not, mom's going to come in or dad's going to come in and take over anyway, so I might as well not bother. And I'm not saying that's this situation, but it is a very common dynamic we see.
Well, and I think that that's the piece of it. If we look at it as all or nothing, right? It's a sort of, if I don't do anything, they will fail. And we're not advocating not doing anything. What we're advocating is creating an environment where your kiddo feels like they have some agency so that they can feel the struggle, maybe even a little bit, to be able to go, wait, I'm struggling. And ideally, that struggle might be there may be a cry or even a glimmer of need for help in that eventually, right? It's just sort of it. And again, you don't want to kind of set them up and say, okay, yep, I'm out. You really want to figure out how to stay as close as you can without being in director mode, so that they can feel the tension, but not feel the failure necessarily.
And Diane, you said something a little while ago about our kids need a win. And if you've got a kid who is really having a hard time stepping up to the plate, then look for a win in another arena. Look for a win someplace else where you can effectively collaborate with each other, build some trust, help them get some success. And then you can maybe move back over into this other arena and begin to have a more authentic conversation. We do a lot of work with parents around how do you have the conversation about whatever. Communication techniques, communication tools, because how to have the conversation is every bit as important as the conversation that you are or are not having.
Mm-hmm. Great. We have quite a few parents here today who also have ADHD. And
me too.
And perhaps did not have a diagnosis until well into their kids' childhoods, adolescence, and beyond. I'm wondering if you can say a little bit something about modeling. It made me think of your last comment about that discomfort and asking for help, which is not always something easy for, especially I think, women with ADHD to do. Yeah. And also self-forgiveness.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that. So I was diagnosed in my 40s when my kids were all diagnosed one by one like dominoes. And at some point I was like, there's no way my husband can be responsible for all of this neurology. And I, at 40 something, was diagnosed with learning and attention issues. And, I cried for a few weeks, and then my whole life made sense. And I understood why I had done everything and why I had majored in what I majored in. And I was, kind of amazed by how much I had accommodated for myself. And what I like to share with other parents, I'm running a group for adult women, and it has kind of become an ADHD adult women support group, which was not expected, but it turned out was what we all needed. And what we've been talking about a lot is how important it is. The first rule of thumb of managing adult ADD, I believe, is to put the stick down. Because for most of us, we've spent most of our lives hitting ourselves over the head with a stick to get ourselves to do anything. Because the only motivator we knew how to do was to beat ourselves up to get something done. And so we got really good at getting something done by saying, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I did that. We're so mean to ourselves. So the first thing we've got to do is to learn to be gentle and to put the stick down, or to turn it into a magic wand, or do something to get rid of that well-worn groove we've created in our head and shift our way of being with ourselves. And then we want to start being transparent. And that modeling you talked about is really powerful, to be able to say to our kids, I get this is hard. This is how it shows up for me. It's hard for me too. Let's see if we can figure it out together. Or to verbalize, this is what I tried. If that didn't work, but I'm going to try this next and see how that goes. To take away that notion that somehow we're supposed to be perfect, and to give them permission to see us learning how to be with it, because that gives them permission to try and practice and fail forward instead of feeling like they're supposed to know it. Diane,
yeah, I was going to add something, because what I see in working with adults with ADHD, and this, we do this to our kids, is it's the formulaic solution. So there's so many great articles and webinars and things like that that say, do this. This is what you need. You need the planner. You need the thing. You need the, and if we focus on doing the thing instead of focusing on what works for me, I mean, this is my plea to all of you out there that are neurodivergent adults, and those of us who are not. Find some support for you that works for you, and work with someone that can help you figure out how to take the advice and the great ideas and the information out there and actually put it into practice in a way that makes sense for you as a human, and not just is like cookbook sort of thing. And that's one of the things I'm most proud about, not just at Impact Parents, but yes, at Impact Parents, but working with a coach and finding a coach that will help you figure out what will work for you and not just do it this way.
You know, you said earlier, way earlier in the presentation, we talked about this is a process. Mm-hmm. And in our work, we understand that managing neurodivergence is about being in the process of learning to manage it instead of only paying attention to the outcomes. And that's exactly what Diane is speaking to, is we have a tendency to be solution focused. And when you're managing ADHD, it may or may not be the right solution. But if we can be in the process of seeing how we do things and tweak and modify the process along the way, we'll get to the outcome we're looking for and figure out what the solution is in the process, because the solution is in the process for us.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Diane and Elaine, so much for being part of this process today and part of the conversation here at ADDitude. We really appreciate your contributions to our community with this webinar and all of your other contributions to ADDitude over the years. And thank you to everyone for joining us today and for submitting your questions and your feedback. We hope you'll join us for another ADDitude webinar. And our next one is on another teen-related topic, and that's addictive technology with Jeremy Edge. So we hope you can join us for that. In the meantime, please stay up to date by visiting attitudemag.com/newsletters. And if you had any trouble accessing the resources today, please know that all the links will be in the follow-up email. So fear not, you will receive all of the resources that Diane and Elaine were speaking about today. And thank you so much again for joining us. We'll see you all again soon.
Thanks, Annie.
Thanks, Annie.
Bye, everyone.